Hey, everybody. So I'm John Miller, and I'm with AWS IT Security. I've been there working in our security integration team for about 3 years and done a lot of security incident response simulations. Our security integration team has a strategic and long-term initiative focus trying to raise the bar on security for AWS and you, our customers. So I'm going to introduce Rob and Armando later in the talk. But today, we're hoping to share our experience doing security simulations with you. Technical difficulties. There we go. So here's what I hope you get out of the talk today. So I want you to know what SIRs are before you leave. We have a great demo put together so you can experience what it's like to be in one, as if it was live. And then I'm really pleased that we have a customer here to share their experience of a live event with a simulation we did with them. And I think that'll be the best part. I also want to share how you engage AWS for security matters. It seems to be a common question people have. And I want to help you get your game on and encourage you to do a simulation. So what are SIRs? It's more than abbreviations, right? So it officially stands for Security Incident Response Simulations. You'll also hear me talk about it as IR Games or IR Game Days. That's what we tend to talk about it inside of AWS. But there's more to learning what something is besides an abbreviation. So it's really about practice and preparedness. So I searched the internet to see if I could find a good quote, founding fathers, coaches, all-star athletes, of what's good and important about simulations and practice and preparedness. And Ariana Grande really speaks to simulation well, whether she knew it or not. So my question to you during this talk is think about this quote and ask yourself, did she get it right? And then think about whether I get bonus points for figuring out how to put Ariana Grande in a security track talk. So in order to understand why we started doing SIRs and why I really want to share them with you, is I want to work backwards from what I hear from our customers. As people move into the cloud, or as I've done SIRs with people, I hear these 7 things repeatedly. The 2 that pop out the most are validate readiness and building a confidence in your team. But the one that I think matters the most is getting faster. The cloud is awesome. It can do some stuff in incident response that you can't do that fast anywhere else. And I think that it's an untouched category that we need to all improve on. So SIRs have 7 main ingredients. The first is to find an issue that's important to your team. So it could be something that you've always been concerned about. It could be something that maybe in your on-premise environment you didn't think you did well, and now that you're moving to the cloud, you want to really ace it. So find an issue that matters to you, something that you're concerned about. It could be something as simple as, I'm worried about phishing attempts on my corporate laptop, or how do I respond to an abuse alert? Then you want to add some security geeks. And you want a builder and a tester at a minimum. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 staff usually to build and develop a game. But you at least need those 2 roles. And we'll talk more about that. You want to build a realistic model of your system. So keeping things realistic is really important to keeping your team's trust. And it's really important to making sure that you're truly validating your readiness. A lot of times we think that, it'll work out, we know how to do something, but until you put hands on keyboards and actually attempt it, it doesn't work out. So when you build a real system, you want to ask yourself, hey, do I want to actually run this game in my production environment? Or do I want to use CloudFormation and completely mimic my production environment? Or do I want to run it in my dev environment? And it really all depends on the risks that you're taking in running your security simulation. So as far as the next steps, you want to build and test. So what are we building? We're going to be building complementary architecture that actually makes your system faster for incident response. It complements your service architecture that's already in place. And then you're also going to be building scripts and wiki and procedures that wrap around your architecture that help the rest of your company engage when you're responding to a security scenario. So after you've got that down and you've tested it, then you invite a bunch of other security geeks and then some other real people like business people and salespeople and stuff like that to participate in the game, maybe PR, legal. And then you actually run a live event, which is usually 2 to 4 hours, and you kick it off with a trigger, and then you actually see how you respond and you wrap it up. And the goal is to get better every time and to repeat this and get into a cadence. So to let you see sort of a timeline of the process, you start off with a scenario. Maybe it's a narrative. Maybe it's a 1 to 2 page description of what the security scenario is and how you plan to respond to it. Or you can even put it into a table form or a list where you say, this machine or this human, these roles are going to do these actions in this way as you go through the security scenario in the live event. Then you set about building the actual scenario. You build the actual response tools that you're going to use to resolve the security scenario. And then you're going to work on the process that wraps around it, those procedures and such. If you're a startup, you might be low on procedure and high on hiring people with high judgment. And if you're an enterprise organization, you might have stacks of documents that tell you what to do next. And then you're going to want to make sure you test it step by step. So you want your tester to be as skilled or more skilled than the builder of the scenario, and you want them to actually go through each role and identify any issues, sort of debug your scenario. You want it to be smooth at the time of the live event because you got 10 plus people in the room and things are really intense and you don't want any hiccups. But the important piece here is that by the time you're done, you've really validated your staff's ability to respond to the scenario. So the other thing I want to share is a couple lessons that we've learned. So one of the things that we figured out is early on is that you want to prevent spoilers. Nobody wants to know the end of the movie before they see it. Or maybe some people do, but I don't. And so as part of that, you want to, what we recommend is that you let your leadership and your builder and your tester know the scenario, and you keep everyone else involved in the live event in the dark. And what that does is it makes it more exciting, and it really challenges the team more to make sure that you really have a sound process to respond. The next thing is to finish at the end. This speaks directly to the validate readiness. So a little bit different than pen testing, where you just go find out an issue and then decide that you might resolve it at some time in the future and put it on a roadmap list. You're really picking something you're concerned about and actually addressing it and building a process to respond to it and then validating it. So the idea is that you finish by the time you're done, you have high confidence. A way of knowing that you've really accomplished this is to, at the end of your live event, when you do your action items of what's left, what do you want to work on, you're going to have a few minor things that are related to the scenario you just tested, and you're going to have maybe some inspired stuff about future scenarios, but you shouldn't really have any big things about the scenario you just tested if you did it right. So enough of static slides. I hope I didn't lose your attention yet. So I'm excited to introduce Armando Late. He's going to be joining us. He's a global security solutions architect at AWS. He goes around and visits customers all the time and helps them build their architectures in the cloud. And he actually helped us. He's helped me with a couple IR games, and he also helped us build this demo so you can see what it's like to be in a game. One thing I want to point out about the demo, so the video is going to be about 5 minutes long. It's close to real time, but it's not exactly real time because I'm hoping to let you guys out to go to the party. And so there's a couple things like resource provisioning that we truncated. But it'll give you a great idea of the different roles and perspectives that occur in a security simulation. And hopefully, it'll also let you see and feel what it's like to be in a simulation. So Armando?
Thank you, John. I know that it sounds a bit strange, right? I'm going to simulate a simulation, right? It's very meta. But what I'll be showing you is based on the experience from previous game days that we ran and some observations that we made regarding what are some of the key ingredients to make them successful and also how they develop when they are getting executed. And one thing that I'd say is that out of the, all the requirements that are in place, that the things that need to be done to set up the simulation, I would highlight 3 that I particularly think are really key. The first one is the scenario. It needs something that is relevant to your organization, that the participants identify with. And the summary of that is that it needs to be realistic. The second one, stating the obvious, you need participants, right? If it is just the responders doing it on their own, it is a worthwhile exercise, but more in terms of preparedness from the perspective of selecting tooling, getting some familiarity. But it is not an end-to-end simulation. An end-to-end simulation is to have participants across the organization, and by that I mean operations from the technical perspective, PR, legal, as John mentioned. If you are using outsourcers or managed service providers, definitely they need to be there as well. And the last one is there has to be a flow or a script. And what I mean by that is the scenario is the tagline that defines the overall event. The flow, the script, is how you break that down into chunks so that you keep the game progressing forward. And also it helps you to think of a real incident when it happens. It's not deterministic, right? There will be all kinds of stuff happening. There will be all kinds of curveballs coming through towards the responder. So when planning it, think of throwing in some curveballs in there. Make it as realistic. With that in mind, in the demo that I will be showing you, so it's compressed to 5 minutes, typically to be an exercise that would run for the whole morning, and the second half that may run during an afternoon. But in the case that I'll be showing you, it is a defacement, easy to identify with, right? Everybody's worried about reputation, reputational damage, quite important. There we go. The participants, I have 3, which I also think are the minimum 3 participants that should be there. Application engineer / someone that is operational responsible for the target of our simulation. Implementer, that is the builder that was mentioned before. Sometimes also referred as the attacker, so the person that is playing the role of the bad guy. And it's also the person that does most of the work in advance. You will be the one that, for example, will be copying a production workload and moving it to a test environment to be tested. You will be developing and creating fake evidence, breadcrumbs that the responder and the forensic analyst will need to identify, planting evidence, and so on. And obviously, we need a responder, right? This guy is going to be the focus of attention during the simulation itself. In the demo itself, you will see that there are 3 injects taking place. The first one, fairly obvious, the website is defaced. The second one is the curveball, which is there's the third party that comes out of nowhere and says that there is an abuse notification. And the third one is there are unauthorized resources being spun up. One thing that I'd just like to add briefly is no spoilers, which is application engineer and implementer, obviously very much part of the planning stages. The responder, in this case, aware that it is an exercise, similar if you've been through a DR type exercise similar to that. So he's aware that there is an exercise going on, no idea what kind of event or which direction it will take, what kind of incident it will be. Obviously, underlying the simulation is a set of tools and a process that is being tested. In this case, the 5, not a big process, but the 5 steps that I'm sharing with you were the ones shared at reInvent 2014 by my colleague Don Bailey. And we are going, for the purpose of the demo, to break it down into 3 stages, just to make it a bit simpler and in the interest of time as well, obviously. But it will be essentially containment, recovery, and then an investigation phase at the end. With all that being said, we will let the games begin. We are using a mock website, yeah, clearly, right? Cue the video. Cue. As soon as the video starts, you will see that there are 3 colors of background, purple, green, and black. Purple is the attacker, builder, implementer. Green is the operations guy, and black is the responder. The site has just been defaced.
Armando, is this a defacement or mass, hypnosis or something?
Indeed, indeed. Or maybe it's the start of the after party, right? Anyway, the defacement has happened. The operations guy now is sending an email to the CERT team, raising it formally as an incident. And when the guy from the responder, I'm not the guy or the girl, but the responder gets the email with a notification from the operations, that's when the real game day will start. So this is just a recipe to get things going. And you will see a couple of things happen in there. He gets the email, he looks at it, will once again do a validation that the site really doesn't look okay. And he will do two things out of band. One of them is generate a trouble ticket through his internal system to assign a unique identifier that will be used to correlate all the items associated with his investigation. And second, he asks for an instance to be spun up based on a pre-baked IR AMI. The reason to spin up a new one, and that will vary from organization to organization, but I think spinning up a new one is a great thing in the sense that you start with a clean environment. It's not contaminated by any previous investigation, be it a real one or an exercise. Very important as well. We don't want anyone to have all keys to the kingdom, when they don't need them. So when the instance is spun up, there is a request that goes together with it that asks for, temporary elevations of privileges to the AWS platform, late binding of privileges. And that will give, the responder the access it requires to perform the actions to stop what's going on. Emails back and forth, etc. And now the actual response is starting. Fairly straightforward, is looking up what is the external IP of the affected website, using that as a filter to do a describe instances. These will help him to collect all the metadata associated with the instance. As he browses to the metadata, quite a lot of valuable information in there. You have the instance ID, which can be used in further filters. AMI ID, could be that's the root cause. Volume ID, important to get a snapshot for forensic analysis later. And the user metadata as well, which in this case, and for the purpose of the demo, there's that metadata pointer, which is a pointer to another store, a CMDB that was residing in DynamoDB in this case, to add some additional perspective on the application that's being affected, and also a tag in that sign that actually this machine had been automated validated, or the affected instance had been automated scanned on that date, and it was OK. So starts to help to build a perspective of what this instance is about and what does it do. And we kind of throw the curveball now, which is saying, actually, we just got an email from Amazon, which is saying that there is an abuse report and that there is an instance that you guys own that is implicated on it. Can you look into it? And if you were to pay very close attention, the instance ID that is in our abuse report matches with the one that was defaced. So at this stage, the responder decides, stop the data collection. We have now more than enough confirmation that something bad is happening. So he decides to jump straight into the containment stage. So he deployed a security group that blocks all communications from the affected machine. He will now move on to tag that machine. You'll notice or may have noticed in the metadata, there was one of the tags was to do with the environment, to do with the life cycle of the instance, production, test, development, etc. In this case, being tagged as being it's under quarantine, so it's being investigated, and allocating the trouble ticket that is being used to link all the items associated with this investigation. This tagging uniquely will become important. Well, it is already important, but we'll see why in a couple of minutes. And lastly, he starts doing a snapshot of the affected instance. Essentially, the same thing that if it was in the old world, right? You'd have to do a mirror of the hard disk to look at it with your forensic tools. In this case, he's using the snapshot for that purpose. Initial data collected. Let's go back to the operations guy and said, yes, I've completed the first steps of my response. I've had to isolate the instance. Can you please spin up a new one and deploy a holding page? We need to look deeper into this. So these were the sequence of steps that were taken. It is not, I guess the main thing in there is that sometimes just in response to events as they are happening, things that are in a playbook cannot be followed straight as they are in there. And there may be a need to just shift gears and take an action like, immediately block without doing any further lookup into what is going on. One of the great things, I think, with the simulations as well is that, when using, be it the CLI or third-party tools or anything, or open source tools, It means that it helps the responders also develop that muscle memory so that when the things really are happening, they know which direction to take and how things will respond to their action. So at that stage, we retrieved a bunch of data, right? There was the metadata, there was a snapshot of the volume, and we instructed the operations guy to deploy his holding page. One thing that is valuable as well is to get a capture of, say, the live memory that is on that instance that is still running, although isolated. And in this case, the way in which the holding page was pushed onto the new instance is because code deploy is being used, and that is the mechanism to make a release of that page. And I do a parenthesis in there, which I think two big goals of the simulations that can be accomplished. One is to validate that your tool set remains as effective as you expect it to be. And the second one, it is also a great opportunity to try and use, be it new tools or new services, and try them in a realistic scenario to be if they either improve your capability to respond or enhance your capability to respond. And my talk about code deploy and live memory was precisely about that, deploy to do so. So in this case, typically if you want to get a capture of live memory, either you have something already loaded, can be a third-party agent, or you need to load some software in there to get it done. If that is the case, often there is a need to log on to the machine in some way. But if the bad guy has been really mean, he may have blocked you from getting access to the instance. So in this case, we are going to piggyback on code deploy to actually do that live memory dump and get it across the network, across to our forensic workstation. So I log on back to the responder workstation, and I will follow the script that I have on screen. Essentially, what we are going to do is the following. Create a package or a release for code deploy to use Lime. Lime is the Linux memory extractor, open source tool, fantastic tool. We are going to create a deployment group, so a target for that release that is only the instance that is quarantined. We are going to push the release to the instance. Code deploy will do its magic that we'll talk about in a second, and we will get the memory dump across the network. So first things first, we create our package. Second, we create our deployment group. And I just highlight in there, if you remember when I was running the video, I said that the tagging was quite important. And that was the reason. That allows me to create a deployment group that targets just the asset that has been compromised. And lastly, I will go ahead and do the actual deployment. There we go. Now, I will attempt to connect and to get that memory across the network. Likely the first time it will fail, which is good. What it means is that code deploy is pushing the release to the instance that is affected. That zip file that was created has been retrieved from S3 is being expanded. There is a NAP-spec YAML file in there that defines what to do. And what it says is copy these files from A to B and then perform this instruction. And the instruction is set to execute after install. So after the files is being moved, perform this instruction. The instruction is a shell script, and the shell script says, load the Lime module to the kernel and open a TCP socket where I want all the memory to be streamed through. If what I just said is true, we should get some memory back now. Good. Obviously, stating the obvious, but if it was a real action, obviously this output would be redirected to a file more than likely, or not more than likely, but you may want to create a new volume attached to your response instance and get the dump just to that module, to that volume. And as we go back, I'd say that I went through this bit, so Lime, once again, great tool. I'd recommend trying it out if you haven't already. And also the definitions in the AppSec YAML. I'd say that at this stage, it's typically the end of the first half of the game. And what I mean by that is that normally at this stage, a lot of the participants could go back to their day jobs. Thanks for their participation. But guys, I don't know, we mentioned PR and legal, for example, they would go back. From the responder's perspective, we just gathered live memory, volumes, there's CloudTrail, there's metadata, and et cetera, and all that now needs to be analyzed. So as we go to the second half of the game, John is going to walk us through it.
Thanks, Armando.
Thank you.
Test? There you go. Okay. So closure of the security simulation is pretty important. In a real security operations environment, you'd have a pretty tight handoff. But I think, to show you the investigation part, it might be worth just doing a simple correlation with logs before we do the handoff. So in this type of scenario, it would make sense to check the instance access logs to the web server that had the issue, the defacement. So if we look into the access logs, you can see that on 2 here, that someone is attempting to inject a script on the login input. So that seems strange. I want to keep looking at this. So I'm going to take note of the time and note of the IP source just in general, try to correlate events. I'm going to define sort of a window, and I'm going to start digging into logs. So as a lateral check, it'd be smart to look into my AWS CloudTrail API logs. I'm going to look in sort of plus or minus 24 hours. So imagine I'm streaming through this, and I see a username of something that's kind of unfamiliar to me. I don't think I know that guy. And then I notice that there's a create user, a create group, a terminate instance. So now I'm thinking, okay, I should check on my data integrity here. So let's take a look at that. So I'm gonna click forward in CloudTrail console and dive in. Okay, so that terminate instance, it was from that IP that was associated with the injection, right? So I'm thinking I need to dive deeper here. So I'm going to keep clicking, and I'm going to look at the event and assess what happened. So here I can see a lot of the properties that are used for IAM policy enforcement. And I can look and confirm that actually I'm in pretty good shape. See where it says client unauthorized operation? So I'm feeling pretty good that my IAM policy prevented any access and prevented the terminate instance command from happening. So I'll sleep well tonight. But I can confirm that this is the thing I was concerned about. You can see the source IP. There's the terminate instance. Oh, there's that funky username that I saw. So the good news is that I can feel comfortable that I've actually recovered and I'm at a normal state. So now I think I am ready to hand things off. So let's wrap up the simulation. So in an actual security scenario where you're handing it off, you're probably going to have an intel team or a security partner that does the equivalent function for your company. And so you're going to do an overview email, overview ticket correspondence, put a bunch of encrypted attachments together, and hand it off to their team for a long tail investigation, where they might do correlations to other events that have happened at other time points and so on. And you'll go back to monitoring your pager. On the simulation side, though, there's some more housekeeping we need to do to wrap up. So we want to capture artifacts, logs, and communications. So that could be everything from chat, email, snapshots of disk and memory captures and so on, tickets, case correspondence, all those types of things. We're going to encrypt it, redact it, and save it. And the reason why you'd want to do that is a lot of companies have to meet some sort of regulatory compliance need, especially if you're a larger enterprise. And so NIST 853, Security Control IR2, if you can remember that, called simulated events, actually suggests that you run simulated events of this nature. So to be FedRAMP or FISMA compliant and things like that, this is a good bit of objective evidence that you can show a third party for accreditation. The thing you want to be careful of, though, is before you encrypt it and wrap it up, you want to redact all your PII, your personally identifiable information, your secrets, and anything about your architecture that you don't want the third-party auditor to know, so that you can protect your organization. But that way you can show your leadership and the outside world that you have strong security controls are effective. Then you want to go into retrospective mode. So this happens during the live event. If you recall, I said it was sort of 2 to 4 hours. So in the last 30 minutes, you want to reserve time for retrospective. The questions you want to ask everybody about the event are, should we continue doing something that we've done? Should we start doing something new that we haven't done before? Or is there something we should stop doing? So let's think about it for Armando's demo. So Things that I would continue doing actually is probably about everything. I think Armando, he thought about it pretty well, and I think he got it right. So things we should start doing, I can think of a few. One, instead of just checking the defaced website with my laptop, maybe I should have launched an AWS Workspaces instance and actually used that, because it's a little bit more disposable if it turns out there was something more than a visual effect. Another thing I would do is I would add alerts. I would use CloudWatch and actually trigger off my CloudTrail API logs history on that error code, because I want to know if somebody tries to terminate an instance and I get an authentication failure like that, and the operation fails, maybe I want a text message from SNS, maybe I want an email from SES, or some sort of trigger so that I respond, and instead of finding out about this from a third party, I find out first. That's what we always want, right? And then there's some other ideas about how you could change things. So let's move on to the stuff. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say one thing. So one more thing I would change is I would script my evaluation and correlation of IPs and time windows and log searching. It's going to take me a while in the console to like scroll through logs. I want to script that and make it easier. I might have to look at the first access log, but after that I set a time window, I set the IP, and the rest of it should be automated. So what would I stop doing? I would stop using the console except for those things I've never done before. I've done this now, so now I know that I can automate it and get that much faster. Because remember, speed matters. So there's one more retrospective you have to have, and that's the game retrospective. So if you're going to get better at security simulations, you're going to want to actually say, hey, in the planning stage, in the building and testing stage, and in the live event, ask those same questions. What should I continue? What should I start? What should I stop? Maybe you need more food. Maybe you need something as simple as that to make the day go well. So the takeaways I have from Armando's demonstration are that it's important to think about and put at the forefront of your thought the customer's viewpoint. So your end user and your customer, what's their experience when you're doing response? The cloud gives you a lot of capability, as simple in his example as putting up the "we'll be right back" page, to actually give the user a great response while you're actually working on an issue. And so take advantage of that. Build that into your incident response process. Be realistic. I think enough's been said on that. Build and optimize your architecture to support IR. I think enough's been said on that. But the last takeaway I have from Armando's experience is if you look at it, and we didn't cherry pick that example, by the way, but you'll notice that beyond the abuse alert that AWS automatically sent, there was really no engagement with AWS IT security. Some people, when they first get to the cloud, they have the perception that somehow they need to know exactly how to reach out to AWS IT security, and that they're going to need to be involved in every incident. Well, the great news is that we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to give our customers self-service tools that help them with their security and their operations in such a situation. So it's actually really rare when you'll actually need to reach out to us. But the good news is we're always on, and we're always there if you want to help us. It doesn't hurt to call. We'll sit through the whole scenario with you. So we're really lucky today to have our guest speaker. But before I go into that case study, I want to talk about some generic case studies that we've done since November. So we've worked with a couple customers in different segments. In the enterprise segment, we've worked with a leader in the oil and gas industry. And that game was really fun. It was a global, it dealt with multiple time zones, and involved their systems integrator, and we had a great experience. It wasn't exactly what Armando showed you, but it was similar in nature. We also worked with a high-tech government agency who had a POAM for regulatory purposes they needed to resolve, and so this was the perfect opportunity to help them out, and in fact, gave them objective evidence to do just that. So they were able to learn and get confidence that they, on their own, without AWS IT Security's help, could do data preservation. They could do disk capture, they could get logs that copied to a secure location, and then also they could get memory capture. And we ran that game earlier in the year, so we didn't get to show them how to do flow capture that came out in around June. But the most exciting game, I have to say, that we've run all year is with a startup here. And the startup is Coinbase. Coinbase is the largest Bitcoin exchange. So it was really interesting to work with their team. They're very advanced users of all AWS services. They're extremely advanced users of security services and features. In fact, it was actually challenging initially for us to figure out a scenario that we could use because their security of their architecture is already so good. So what we ended up doing is we created a prod replica, if you will, with CloudFormation. So it was a non-prod environment. There was nothing actually at risk. But we knew where those things would be should we encounter them during the game. And then we convinced them to suppress a few security controls so that we could actually have an exciting game. And it worked out great. So the scenario we had was we had an advanced threat with escalated privileges. There's lots of ways you could get to that point, but that's sort of a starting point. We made sure that the scenario was rapid and adversarial. So it was a pre-planned execution. There were commands that were just rapidly coming at us that we had to respond to. And then to make it flavorful and very modern, it's a crypto ransom element to the attack. So the outcome was really successful. They exceeded my expectations, actually. They had an extremely rapid response, rapid recovery. They eliminated all their risks. And in the end, they really surprised me because they got even farther in the root cause investigation than we anticipated, and they got all the way back to the beginning of when we started creating artifacts for this incident response game day. So with that in mind, I'm really pleased to introduce the Director of Infrastructure, which also controls their security function for Coinbase, a leader in security, Rob Witoff.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. That's forward.
Great, thank you, John. Thank you, Armando. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and sticking around until the end of the day. So like John mentioned, we recently had this great privilege to work with John's team and some great pen testers inside AWS to really exercise how we've been implementing Amazon's self-service security model. For those of you who haven't seen our site before, we pitch ourselves as the easiest place to buy and sell Bitcoin. So we provide several services under that umbrella. Now at Coinbase, we believe really heavily in practicing our security. For anyone that's ever studied special ops, you know practice is a core part of making sure your team is constantly ready. Just like the retrospectives John's mentioned to make sure you're constantly learning and seeing what you've done, and the muscle memory Armando mentioned, which is something we want to make sure we always have. So we're going to walk through the customer side of what this really felt like for our team during one of these incidents. And before we jump into this, I just want to really stress, this was done in a replica environment. No real data was ever at risk here, but this did feel like a real simulation for our engineers after we'd gone through a lengthy process of executive buy-in at the company. So the way this all started was early on a Tuesday morning, before all of the staff was in the office. And at Coinbase, we really don't like people logging into our machines, and we go to great lengths to block that. And if you do ever log into a machine, an alert will be fired. And so we had an alert fired early one morning, and we had one of our engineers was Paige and saw that and said, well, that's interesting. We don't have anyone named Adrian at the company. Why would someone named Adrian be logging in? And 8 minutes later, Adrian logged out of one of our servers, which was also curious. And we started discussing this inside. We said, well, what is this? We have someone named Adriana. Maybe she's inside our servers. Or maybe someone's testing. So at this point, at best case, we were curious. Something anomalous had happened. A few minutes after that, we saw some other alarms started to fire inside that showed somebody was probing and scanning our network. And at this point, we start to realize, okay, something's happening. We need to get our heads on top of this. We need to really understand this. And when we get into this phase, I really like some of the quotes that came out of the Apollo 13 event. This quote actually came from the movie, but Gene Kranz later used. And when this happens, this is not something that we should be afraid of. This is actually a chance to shine. All those tools you've invested in, all those logs, alerting, scanning, and other tools inside of your network, this is the chance to really use and exercise them. And in the process of using and exercise these, we really like this OODA loop decision-making framework that came from the US Air Force. Bruce Schneier has written and spoken extensively about this, and I'd really recommend some of the things he shared for how this can be applied to security. And so the first step in this OODA loop, to observe, orient, decide, and then take action and repeat this loop, we wanted to make sure we had the most effective observation capabilities we could find. So we took over the executive conference room of the company, gathered everyone inside, and started to observe and see what other indicators we saw around our environment. And just after this room formed, some of our other alerts started to fire. One of those alerts was a CloudTrail alarm that told us we had just maxed out the amount of instances that could be launched in this development environment. Also fairly curious, right? And then a few minutes after that, this other alarm fired. So while we're investigating what's happening here, we see that some of the data volumes in this development environment had been shared with an account that we didn't have registered in our logs as one of ours. So at this point, we see things leaving our environment. So when we think about the OODA loop and what that tells us, we see a lot of specific things happening. But before we can really advance to the orient phase, which is all about context, we need to make sure we know we're putting our resources in the right place and understanding the context of what those alarms really mean. One of our engineers summed up how a part of the team fell to the stage fairly well with another message, I thought. And so to help us really observe and make sure we knew what was happening, I thought our CloudTrail pipeline was extremely effective at this, and this was a great enabler for us. For those of you who haven't set something like this up inside, or like what Armando showed earlier, this is where we're taking all of the CloudTrail actions, and in our environment, they get dropped into S3, which we use to fire a Lambda event, which sends all of those through Kinesis. So we get a one-to-many stream to fire real-time alarms, send that data out for disaster recovery, and do a variety of other things, including sending that into an ELK stack that we have inside that gives us an Elasticsearch base for full-text search and a Kibana web interface where we can easily query and traverse and see what's happening inside our environment. And this was incredibly important for us because this allowed us to quickly narrow down the scope of what we were really observing to give proper context to orient ourselves. So we could see that there wasn't anything else more malicious happening at this moment and zoom in on what was really interesting to us. And these alarms that we saw could really be divided pretty directly into two categories. From one, we saw somebody was clearly on a part of our network, and on the other piece, we saw pretty clearly one of our keys had been compromised. So we then immediately split into two teams to start taking clear actions on those two decision-making components. And for the first Team 2, we focused Team 2 on the compromised server. We wanted to see what had actually happened on this box to find more indicators of compromise and identify and contain the scope of what had happened. And now, one of the most effective ways to see what's happened on a large number of boxes, and remember, this is after they had maxed out the number of servers that could be launched into this account, was snapshotting all of the volumes attached to these, stopping those instances after containing their security groups, mounting these to one of the largest boxes we could find with high PIOPS and SRIOV to get the maximum throughput, mounting and then grepping through those logs to find deltas and anomalies. And on one of these servers, we saw this malicious actor, who is yet to be identified, had dropped some fun pictures for us in the message of the day on the box. So at this point, we're really seeing something malicious is happening inside. Okay? So while Team 2 is investigating the servers and where there are deltas from our reference implementations, Team 3 is looking at the keys that appear to have leaked from our environment. Now, Team 3 can look inside of IAM and see when these keys were last used. Using Kibana, we can trace back exactly what keys through CloudTrail had been used in this case. And we see that this key is not only active, but when it was last used, which corresponds to the indicators and alarms we'd seen. And with a click, we can disable that key to make sure that that attacker can no longer traverse or use those keys in our environment. Now, we noticed something interesting had happened with this key because we're really restrictive in our IAM policies. We don't allow our keys to be used outside of Coinbase networking space. So we have this source IP address condition on all of our policies. So we also knew that this key had been used on what looked like another compromised box inside of our environment. And so we wanted to find out exactly where that had come from as well. And we deactivated this key just in time because right after this malicious crypto ransomer sent us an email saying he had access to our AWS key and secret, and he was going to hold that unless we could pay him off in Bitcoin and some kind of bounty. What an awful person. So while this was happening, Team 3, as they were investigating the rest of our logs inside of Kibana, we had one of our engineers on the team was looking through to find out how that key was created and everything he could find about that, and really traversing historically to see what had happened. And it was in that traversal where he was able to tie that all the way back to see when John and Josh and our team had first met to set up the simulation and saw that some awful party named Rob had first created that compromised key. And this was when this game started to come to a conclusion, and we started to wrap up and really convert from what has happened to, we now know what has happened to containing and realizing the extent to what this game had considered. Now, at the end of a game like this is a pretty stressful event, right? And the last thing we want is for security engineers at our company to get stressed out and fear the next event. So we work hard to make sure this turns into as positive an environment as possible. So at the end, we had bottles of champagne ready to go. We had a keg. We had cake. We had a good time. We turned this into as positive as possible of an exercise. And the last thing I wanted to point out in this, while we set up this event, we really wanted to keep AWS engaged. And so we had come up with a cover story to sneak one of the inside men into the event. And so John was there posing as a security researcher that was there shadowing me for the day. And so we really got to have a great time with John and our pen tester, Josh, who helped us run through this. And then moving beyond this is not just a one-time event for us. This is something we're constantly exercising and working with. And it's this kind of practice that helps make sure our tools are in use and we're ready to secure ourselves for more events in the future.
Thanks so much, Rob, for that. That was a great presentation. I really liked the energy that was in the live event. I have to say, it was a bold move by Rob to say, we're just going to completely surprise our team. I had to think twice about it, but it was an outstanding experience. So, some of the takeaways I had from the Coinbase exercise that I think are worth sharing is that security incident response simulations aren't just for people who are new to the cloud or people who are new to security. Here we have one of the most advanced security teams and advanced architectures for security probably in the world, and yet we're still able to help them raise the bar by doing these simulations. In fact, I was really pleased when their CEO said that they thought it was worth the investment of time and effort, and that they were committed to doing it, I think, every 6 months. And so I was like, wow, that's a big win for everybody in security and everybody in the cloud. So I was really glad to hear that. So I promised you earlier that I'd talk about how to engage AWS, but I have to have one more takeaway from Coinbase's exercise. So again, AWS IT security at the infrastructure level, the part that we protect, didn't have to engage in this event. Their company was completely empowered to control their destiny and to control their data security through the self-service tools that we offer. So that was a great story. But we're always on, and we're always here if you need us. So I should tell you how to reach us. So the question comes up, when do you reach out to AWS for security matters? Well, most security matters start off as actually some sort of operational issue, and then they might escalate to a level of security. Some of the ones that we've shown you in these games today, we started out pure security, but that's because we had a bias of what we were trying to do with the game. But in reality, usually things initiate as some sort of support ticket or something like that. So it makes sense, and this is why we actually have you engage AWS support. And our staff are actually trained to know when to escalate and help you make that assessment. So when can you call us? Well, you can reach out to us anytime that you think that an event may be occurring that might affect your operations ideal state. So that's a pretty broad thing. That just kind of means call us if you're concerned. But there are times that you want to reach out to AWS security for sure. We have a really easy portal experience where you can just tell us that you're about to pen test, or you're about to do a SIRS, or you're about to do some sort of scanning on your resources. And it creates a discussion. It allows us to have a chance to approve it, allows us to help support you if we recognize that you need support, because you're self-identifying. And then also, very importantly, it helps us help you not construct a game that violates the AUP. If you do decide to engage with support and you happen to be an enterprise company and you've paid for enterprise support, then you should just go to your TAM first, your technical account manager. They're available 24/7. If you're a really large company, you might have more than one. If you're a smaller company or you're paying for business support, the cloud support engineers are always available to help 24/7. So let's look at the type of humans that you'll encounter as you engage AWS. So we got the TAMs and the CSEs. The CSEs, they're very specific on issues. They're case-focused. They're great at driving to resolution. So if you have a specific need, you always want to make sure you get a case opened, even if you've talked to your TAM. Ideally, your TAM will open it for you. They're really good at communicating with each other to make it easier on you. If you are an enterprise and you have enterprise support, the TAM comes in handy because they can manage the whole relationship. They can manage sort of all your cases together if you have more than one. And then we always have, with access to both those staff, the subject matter experts. The security guys are in there somewhere. I'm not sure what color they are. So. But when you want to do a cloud support engineering support case, you simply just go to the Contact Us page, and you click Sign In and Contact Support. It's that easy. Then all of a sudden, you'll have a chat, email, or phone call opened up. So I want to challenge everybody here to get their game on, right? So if you're not convinced yet that you should be running a security simulation, maybe these questions will help convince you. So does your architecture have real-time monitoring in all the areas you want? Are you ready to detect it? Is it going to your phone? Is it going to your pager? Do you have logs at the ready? Are they going to a secure central storage location with versioning on and MFA delete? And oh, I hit the button. So that your security responders can actually get to them rapidly and know that they weren't tampered with. Are your resources tagged for escalation? If you've done a lot of security operations, you know that one of the things that takes the longest is finding the business owner of services and engaging them. This is true with on-premise. It's true everywhere. And it keeps drifting. So what you can do is you can actually be smart about how you tag your resources so that you can find owners rapidly. You can also tag your resources so that you can know the criticality of it. Is this a production instance? What is this instance involved in? And then you can even tag your resources in the middle of a scenario to say, hey, I want to do memory capture on all those instances. It really is drifting. So rapid recovery, AWS is built for that. We tell that story all the time, so you're probably already built for that, but if you aren't, don't worry. Rapid data preservation, forensic AMIs. Do you have a forensic AMI? Do you have a standby forensic instance that's ready to connect in the region that your resources are at so you can rapidly and securely look at logs and things like that? And the last one there on the slide before is late binding authentication. So with IAM policy, you have something that people don't often consider, which is you can actually grant the superpowers that security engineers need and operational engineers need to resolve an issue right when they're trying to respond to the issue. They don't need those superpowers all the time, because that in itself is a little bit of a risk. So that's a neat feature that you can have. Well, if those architecture questions have you worried, you have no need to worry. Because if you start doing these security simulations, you'll see that if you remember these 5 elements, that there's a building your architecture and building your process step in there. So you'll automatically start building that into your system. So I encourage you to pick a scenario. So if you don't pick one before this talk is over, pick one before you leave the conference on Friday. So here's a few that you can consider. So one is web server application layer. Pretend you have an issue and then recover from it. Another one is log dive for artifacts. So this is the simple one to get started with. You plant some Easter eggs in there, plant correlated events. See if your security team can actually pull those things out and identify next steps as a simulation. Data preservation we've talked about. Mass credential rotation is a fun one. Can you do it in your prod environment? Maybe you should figure out how. Maybe you can use a SERS to figure that out. Responding to alerts, I think, goes without saying. And there's a few more there you can consider. Number 6 is actually really popular to do. So once you've picked one, I want to encourage you to reach out to our AWS professional services group. So what they're able to do is they have security solution architects that can help coach you through this if it's the first time and you feel uncomfortable about it or you want some tips. And they even have the ability to build the games and work with you directly on site to help build the games. So something to consider. But whether you do it with them or you go solo, always make sure you let us know that you're working SIRS and that you're planning to do one so we can at least help you at the support level at a minimum. But I really encourage you to do it. Oh, one more slide. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Well, I hope you can remember to complete the evaluations. But before you go, if you could bear with me as I thank a few people. So Josh DeLuke, actually, Josh, do you mind standing up and I embarrass you? So Josh was the attacker in the Coinbase game that Rob was alerting to. Yeah, he is responsible for the 4-horned beast that you saw. And I also really want to give thanks to Don Bailey, who goes by Beetle. You might have heard, if you haven't, his session, SEC316. I highly recommend that you watch that one. He and Josh put together a great talk showing about how you can automate a lot of incident response situations, and it's really fascinating to see. I want to thank Beetle for being a mentor for incident response this whole time, and then I also want to give thanks to Hart Rossman, who has many talks here I encourage you to see. He was a great mentor this last year as I've been working with customers. So Rob and Armando, thank you so much. I appreciate your coming out and helping. And everybody, I appreciate you staying so late. I give you 4 minutes and 24 seconds back. So go enjoy the party.